If the 19th century, through melodrama and scene design, brought us to realism, the 20th century can be considered as a hunt for the unrealistic, returning theater back to its theatricality, back to its theatrical roots of ritual and storytelling and personal communication between actor and the audience. No fourth walls, no looking through keyholes on a slice of life. Peter Brook had written that if one person walks across a stage while another person is watching, that is an act of theater and an engagement between actor and audience. So the written lecture, I think, is pretty complete about it, and especially if you watch the video at the end of that lecture, the Theatre in the 20th Century from the BBC, that will tell you a lot. But we also are in a time when people write books, so I've got some books to show you. That's all. You know, we're talking about, well, Adolf Appia, new stagecraft, okay? Theater of Adolf Appia and Edward Gordon Craig and Robert Edmond Jones. All right, the Swiss, the Englishman, and the American. This is a book, again, backwards writing by Edward Gordon Craig, called On the Art of the Theater. He doesn't really have any illustrations in here, but he has a lot of talk about, let me see, okay, the artists of the future theater, the actor and the Uber marionette. Now, this is something that Craig had done, a concept he had. He didn't like actors. Think of Indigo Jones. Remember when Indigo Jones and Ben Jonson had that argument about, and in print, an argument about what was more important on the stage, the actor, the story, the play, or the scenery, right? Well, Gordon Craig had the same sort of problem. Uber marionette means it's a marionette, a puppet. Uber means higher than anything else. See, instead of actors on stage, you should use puppets because there is not. You can manipulate a puppet. You can't manipulate an actor. And that's a human being who still has mind function, expression, etc., of his or herself. So there's no necessarily, even if you're directing them, once they're up there in front of that audience, they can really do whatever they want. You hope that they don't burst out of your concept, etc. But with Craig, Gordon Craig, he invented or had the idea that all theater should be performed by marionettes. Um, the art of the theater, first art, the ghost and the tragedy of Shakespeare. I guess he's just realism and the actor, open air theater, symbolism, the exquisite and the precious. Anyway, these are things that he came up with. Robert Edmond Jones has a wonderful book that if you ever go to a library and just, it's very accessible. There he is. That's Robert Edmond Jones back in the 30s. Um, he It's called The Dramatic Imagination. And you see, it's a small little book, and it's just beautiful, beautifully written, and it's only 150 something pages long, 160 pages. Um, what are his chapter breakdowns? A new kind of drama, art in the theater as it was and as it is. He goes through Greeks and Shakespeare, and he talks about design and those things to a young stage designer. These are his tips. Some thoughts on stage costume, light and shadow in the theater, towards a new stage and behind the scenes. I don't know. Okay, here, the sole aim of the arts of scene designing, costuming, lighting is, as I already said, to enhance the natural powers of the actor. It is for the director to call forth these powers and urge them into the pattern of the play. And there's a little opposite from what Gordon Craig wanted. Mr. Jones did like the actors. And it's all about that. Then we have what I call the Trinity of the 20th century. In no particular order, right? Well, but yeah, in order, I guess. Antonin Artaud, The Theater and Its Double. Brecht on Theater. This is a book not really written by Brecht. It's a compilation of various essays and articles that Brecht had written. He was too busy writing his plays. He didn't sit down and actually write a book. But this is interesting as well. And then a Polish theater director, Towards a Poor Theater, by Jerzy Grotowski. Now, I didn't write about him in the thing, and yet you should look about him. He had a theater company in Poland that was called the Polish Laboratory Theater, and this was in the 60s. These men, he died in 1948, Mr. Artaud, Brecht, 1956, and Mr. Grotowski, not until like 1999 or something like that. 99? Yes, I was looking at some notes I had. Yes, 99. He's a theater director, and this is where you really strip the actor of everything. No sets, sometimes no costumes back in the 60s. And the only thing he has is he or she, I should keep saying. I'm an older guy, so the he is the go-to pronoun, but I know in these days, not really. So anyway, the actor, let's just say that. The voice, the body. Harking back to Meyerbeer's biomechanics, which was in response to Stanislavski. These people are also, Stanislavski got the realism, right? Meyerhold, not Meyerbeer. Meyerhold is a director also, but he invented biomechanics. I think that the mechanics of the body. And Grotowski explores the same thing. Some famous pictures. Let me see if I've got some pictures. Here's facial expressions. Right? How to deal with facial expressions, the muscles in your face. Let me see something else. I usually pass this book around in class when we're in class so that people can look at the pictures. I don't know. Here's some production pictures, like this guy here. Right? But it's... And the very fact that he called his theater a laboratory... that's what he means by poor theater. Stripping away, it doesn't mean inexpensive or theater for, working class people or people who have no money. It doesn't mean that kind of poor. All right? He means that it's just the actor and the material. So he's got theater is an encounter. Then he talks about particular plays and his own and speech, etc. It's more of a collection. But the decisive factor in this process is the actor's technique of psychic penetration. He must learn to use his role as if he were a surgeon's scalpel to dissect himself. It is not a question of portraying himself under certain given circumstances or of living a part, and living is in quotes, living a part, nor does it entail the distinct sort of acting common to epic theater, that's Brecht, and based on cold calculation. The important thing is to use the role as a trampoline, as an instrument with which to study what is hidden behind our everyday mask, the innermost core of our personality, in order to sacrifice it, expose it. When these two gentlemen, Brecht and Artaud, came up with 20th century theater, I'm going to talk about these guys in a minute, they're very important. Grotowski gave us a means of how to act it. How do you do Beckett? Beckett's Waiting for Godot. It's in your study list. You should look it up also. So much is in this century now that there's a lot of stuff. That's why I wanted to wait till now so that you could have the 2 weeks or a couple of weeks before you take the test. Okay. Anyway, He gave us the language of that. Artaud directed one play in his life. He was a poet, but he was also a little mentally imbalanced, let's put it that way, to be kind. He spent most of his life in asylums. He died in one. But he had this grand vision of theater as ritual, theater as religion, which is what Richard Ayres says in the video that I asked you to watch at the very end. To turn to turn theater into wine. You know, it's a very introverted, self-centered, enclosed. Actors are together. They work in a group. Then nobody writes a play. It's organic. There was a theater company in the '60s and '70s and '80s and '90s and in the 2000s. I think they're disbanded now, but they were called the Living Theater. They would go. Julian Beck and Judith Molina were the directors, or they put the theater together. They used to perform in streets, take the theater to the streets, and they were based very, very much on Artaud's writing. In your face, they would run up to people in crowds and scream in their faces, and just, it was very much like happenings were. They perform on steps of the Museum of Natural History or something. They would get arrested because they had no permits for doing these kinds of improvisational performances, and they got in trouble a lot. But they were very influential in the theater in the later half of the 20th century, the theater that I grew up in. That's why I'm saying that Artaud